It is recommended that you first watch my review on A New Beginning before watching this video. With that being said, let's get things started. So continuing on with the Legend of Spyro series, we have the second game, The Eternal Night, which was developed by Chrome Studios and was published by Sierra Entertainment. It wasn't long after I had beaten the first game that I moved on to the second one. I hadn't heard any reception to the game, so I went in with a blank slate opinion. So after having played the game, is The Legend of Spyro The Eternal Night worth playing? I would like to give a fair warning here that this segment will contain spoilers to A New Beginning, so skip to here to avoid spoilers. Things start off at the end of the last game with the battle between Spyro and Cinder. After beating Cinder, Spyro saves her and brings her back to the Dragon Temple with the Elder Dragons. Some time has passed and Spyro is still weak after his fight and has been having nightmares. During one restless night, Spyro is met by Sparks, who informs him that Cinder was leaving the temple. Spyro pursues her only to find out Cinder feels guilty for her actions when being controlled by the Dark Master. Soon after she leaves, the temple gets attacked by the Dark Master's army. With the help of the elders, Spyro manages to save the temple. From here, everyone decides to split up after learning about Spyro's dreams, where he says he's been contacted by someone called the Chronicler. And with that, Spyro and Sparks set out and follow the Chronicler's orders so that Spyro can learn more about the history of the dragons. The story this time around to me is actually really weak. My first problem is that almost all the characters from the previous game are very absent this time around, and are replaced with two villains who aren't very interesting or all that great. To be fair though, the Chronicler is a really interesting character, and the backstory of the Dark Master is actually a really great concept, but I won't spoil that here. As for the characters, well, Spyro is still pretty decent and kind-hearted, however his goals and objectives aren't very clear. Sparks this time around is quite annoying and not very likable, but I'll get more into that in a later segment. The Legend of Spyro The Eternal Night is an action-adventure game. The gameplay is basically the same as the previous game with the 4 elemental breaths, the same combat and useless charge attack, gliding, and the gems act exactly the same as before too. To be fair, there are some minor and more major differences. For example, there are a couple minor differences in combat, mostly when you have an enemy in air. When hitting an enemy in mid-air who is in low health, the action for some reason slows down, which gets really annoying since hitting an enemy in the air is the most effective way of taking out enemies. Sure, this was in the previous game, but it just seems a bit more apparent here in this one. Also, if you hit an enemy in the air with a charge attack, it will knock the enemy down with an elemental effect that can damage the other enemies down below. Breath attacks have also been changed a bit. There's still a basic attack and a secondary attack, but depending on the element, there's a bit of more uniqueness to them this time around. Fire's primary attack is still just him blowing fire, while his secondary attack is a flaming charge, which honestly isn't all that great. Lightning sucks much less now. Its primary attack is a charged electro orb that can explode, which when timed well can be rather helpful. However, its secondary attack is an electric tornado that is awkward to control, isn't very effective, and drains your mana extremely fast. Earth is the second best breath this time, as its primary attack is a glowing orb that you can swing around, and it's quite effective if you first jump and then use the attack. While its secondary attack is creating an orb around Spyro, which again works best if you jump first, but it honestly isn't all that helpful. Ice is surprisingly the best element in the game, as its primary attack can be charged and acts like an ice bomb that leaves a dust cloud that slows enemies down, and its secondary attack is an amazingly helpful and strong tail attack that can freeze enemies. Not only have the elements changed, but the breath attacks are used to solve some minor puzzles, which I like even if they are super simplistic. The frenzy attacks make a return as well, and it takes much less purple gems to fill up the bar, making these attacks much more useful. And from the menu screen, you can once again level up your breath attacks. Spyro now has the ability to slow time as well. Slowing time is quite an awkward experience since Spyro goes super slow as well. Slowing down time does put a bit more focus on some platforming, however these moments aren't all that great and the mechanic isn't used very often. There are also these very awkward strafing segments when fighting flying enemies. The strafing feels rather awkward and honestly isn't all that great. Progressing through the game is very linear as you basically just keep moving forward, fighting enemies, and solve simple puzzles, or do some basic platforming. Boss fights this time around are quite awful, as I hated just about every single boss fight in the game. Much like A New Beginning, the game looks pretty good. The art style is good in both the environments and character design. Admittedly though, the environments get rather dull with the Sky Pirate part of the game, which is a rather large part of the game. The first level, however, does have a nice midnight feel to it and mixes the glowing effects very well. Voice acting for all but one character is still pretty good, even if Ignitus isn't in the game for very long. And Martin Jarvis does a really good job as the Chronicler. However, Billy West as Sparks is awful. Not to hate on Billy West, who people may like from shows like Ren and Stimpy or Futurama, but in this game he gives Sparks the most annoying and unnatural voice ever. And it's his voice alone that makes Sparks my least favorite character in the game. Music, on the other hand, is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's as good as the previous game's music, but it's still pretty decent. So, would I recommend playing The Legend of Spyro: The Eternal Night? No, this game is far from an enjoyable experience. Not to say it's a bad game, or at least an awful game, but I did not have fun with this game. Sure, the new moves for the breath attacks is a cool concept, and the Chronicler is a cool character with some interesting story ideas, but everything else sucks. First of all, it has the same combat problem as the first game, where enemies have too much health and very little variety. Not only that, but now there are enemies who when knocked over can't be hit and will regain health, or slug enemies who have very small hitboxes. Speaking of hitboxes, hitting enemies is extremely awkward since some moments you seem like you should have hit the enemy but didn't, or the reverse moments when you thought you should have gotten away from an attack but instead get hit. The adventure itself is just so boring. Sure, there's a nice hint to Hunter and I like the Dark Master's backstory, but you spend way too much time on the skyships and the environments just don't stand out too much. Oh, and there's a slow time mechanic that isn't really all that great, but the moments in Spyro's dreams with the Chronicler are okay. In the end, I got bored and annoyed with this game, which is why I wouldn't recommend playing it. Let's hope the last game is much better. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this review and found it to be rather informative. If you'd like to see more reviews, please check out my channel. And please don't forget to subscribe. And if there are any other PS2 games you'd like to see me review in the future, please leave a suggestion down below. Well, I'm MCB the PS2 Gamer, and I'll see you guys next time.